Our next guest is someone who got Will Hardy to wear the Canada red when the Jazz played the Raptors in Toronto. He is a proud Canadian. Assistant coach Scott Morrison on the podcast. Scott, thank you so much.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on.
What was the back and forth between that game between the U.S. and Canada?
Well, Coach Hardy and I tend to talk a lot of junk to each other or anyone that will listen or ignore us. So we were obviously trashing each other about our respective countries in a fun way, and we decided to put a friendly wager on who would finish higher in the tournament. This was before the tournament started, so the bet was if Canada finished higher, he would wear the Canada shirt or jacket at the time of my choosing, and if USA finished higher, I would wear an Uncle Sam costume on a road trip. So I was quite happy to wear the Uncle Sam costume. It would have been pretty funny. But it just so happened that it came down to the final game, Canada versus USA, so put a little bit extra intensity on it, and I was pretty happy that we came out on top. And I know all of my celebrating and trash talking since is probably going to come back to haunt me when Durant and LeBron and all these guys decide to play
Olympics,
next year. But
yeah.
I'll take my chances and enjoy the win while I can.
But this is a pretty good time for Canada basketball, and to be there in the World Cup is pretty cool to see.
Oh, no question. I've been involved with Canada basketball for over 10 years now, so I've been part of some ups and part of some downs, and all of us that have been through the cycles of trying to qualify and falling just short the last few times, this is a special moment to qualify for the Olympics and to medal in the World Cup. And I was sad that I wasn't over there with the team, but I was happy to have a little bit of a part of helping them prepare and communicating with their coaches. So kind of everyone that's been a part of the program for the last few years has a sense of pride over what this team accomplished for sure.
Tell me about growing up, because if I understand it correctly, small town, grew up playing for your father at one point, become the all-time leading assists and 3-points player at your college. How did you develop a love for the game?
Just through my parents, really. My dad and mom are both coaches. They coached high school before I was born, I believe, and then my first memories are really in the University of Prince Edward Island gymnasium. At my dad's practices, he coached the women's team first. Maybe my earliest memory, now that I think about it, is getting drilled with a ball in the face as like a 3-year-old or 4-year-old at one of the practices, and that's kind of how I grew up. I was very blessed to have that childhood. The small town part, and I wouldn't even call it a town. We didn't have any stoplights or anything. It was basically a village, and he would commute to the city, quote unquote,
right.
of about 20,000 people where the university was, and just got to be part of the road trips, the practices, the team meetings, and I just evolved from like the mascot to the ball boy to the water boy to the manager to the video guy, and then by the time I graduated high school, I was good enough to play. So, it was a cool way to grow up, and it gave me a good foundation for learning the game and understanding the game, and a lot of great experiences that some kids don't get to have.
Were there added pressures playing for your dad?
I mean, it's not like playing for Duke or something like that. It's like basically the Division II level, and I know obviously you want to win, and people hang the banners when you do and things like that. My freshman year, we fell just short of a conference championship, and then it was all downhill from there. So I like to joke that I got my dad fired. Not the best joke, obviously, but he recovered pretty well. But I left as the all-time leading 3-point made and attempted, and the attempts got a little bit more attention sometimes. It was before the Steph Curry revolutionized the shot selection and things like that. And I like to say I was ahead of my time shooting all those threes, but at the time it wasn't. It was kind of frowned upon, and I think he took the blame for some of my maybe ill-advised shots. But we laugh about it now, and like I said, I like to say that I was ahead of my time.
Well, and that sets up some things that you do later on in your career when you're studying shot selection and studying how best to generate three-pointers, right? You did a research paper when you were at the Celtics about three-point attempts.
Yes, sir. So I coached college for 10, 12 years in Canada right out of school. I was lucky to get a job right after I graduated. And after about 10 years, I wanted to just take a year off and learn. Not the most common thing to do here. Obviously, Bill Self's not taking a sabbatical to go chill for a year. But in Canada, that's kind of more common. We don't make the same amount of money, and when you top out, they got to incentivize your contract somehow. So I asked for a year off to go study the game, and was lucky to get a volunteer position with the Maine Red Claws, now the Maine Celtics of the G League. So while I was there, I basically just did the laundry and drove the bus, things like that. Like any intern, I was the league's oldest intern, and I wanted to do what a professor would do if they took a sabbatical, which they would study some topic and produce a paper, and mainly for my own benefit. So I studied shot creation, three-point shot creation. It was the start of kind of what we know now as the norm in shot selection, in terms of just shoot as many threes as you can, layups, threes, free throws. The Houston Rockets were kind of starting that revolution in terms of their G League team was just shooting threes and layups. And I wanted to prove that not all threes are created equally, meaning basically dribbling down and shooting it is not as good as if you drive and kick or set a good screen and get free off that. So I charted about, I want to say 10, 15,000 threes that year, and how they were created, and put them all in a spreadsheet, and basically came up with the philosophy that getting a paint touch or a paint threat to create a three is the best possible three you can get. Some coaches would say, duh, we knew that already. But just watching all those clips and all those threes taught me more than just shot selection, watching how people make reads off pick and rolls and off-ball screens, and kind of brought my knowledge of how to get good looks to a whole new level. So it wasn't Einstein's theory of relativity or anything like that, but it did teach me a lot, and it was a good lesson for me.
Morrison's theory of threes.
Sure, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was a thick paper of things that people could say in probably 30 seconds, but
that's all right.
It was a fun experience.
Well, that's the academic part of the game.
Yeah.
How did you end up in the NBA? Because the connection came through meeting people at Summer League, right?
Well, that year, there was two of us that were interns with the Red Claws. Myself, who I was a 35-year-old, 10-year head coach, and Jim Moran was a 35-year-old, recently retired European pro. And Jim and I both ended up in Maine, got to know each other, became good friends. We kind of were the old guys from the Muppets in the rafters. I forget their names, Statler and Waldorf.
Yes.
So we just did all the grunt work, worked out guys after practice, and we didn't travel with the team. So when the team would go on the road, we would drive down to Boston and just watch practice, help out whatever we could, get to know the Boston guys that way. When the season ended, they let go of the head coach in Maine, Mike Taylor, who's a great coach and was a good mentor for me too. So Jim and I were both unemployed. I still had a job back in Canada, so I was back home getting ready for the next college season to restart that part of my career. But I wanted to, having seen the G League and getting a little taste of it, I wanted to get back down and try and get a position, whether it be an assistant coach or whatever. There was 2 or 3 people in the Celtics organization that were kind of pushing for me to get a chance at the head coaching job, because I had head coaching experience and now a year of G League experience. So Coach Stevens was kind of slow to decide what he wanted to do. He wanted to look at some different options. So the people that were pushing for me suggested that Jim and I go down to Orlando Summer League, which I don't even know if it still exists, but Celtics used to go every year. So we went down on our own dime and got a hotel room and kind of just waited. We went to the games, and these guys were telling me, we're going to try and get Coach Stevens to meet with you while you're here. And the week was getting down there, so I think it was the last or second last day. And Jim and I were getting ready to go to the arena to watch the games, and I got a call from Ron Norred, who's now with the Atlanta Hawks. Hey, Brad is ready to meet with you. So I hustled down to this restaurant they were at, and Orlando in July is pretty humid. So by the time I got down to the restaurant, because I was late, I was just dripping sweat. And I sit down, and Coach Stevens, who I've met before but doesn't really know me, is looking at Ron like, is this guy okay? Like, I have a towel and I'm wiping myself, and Ron's like, don't worry, he's Canadian, he's not used to this weather. But really, I was just nervous and in a panic. So meeting went well, didn't know what to make of it, got to the arena. As soon as I got in there, Danny Ainge came up to me and said, hey, I want you to sit with me for the game. I'd met Danny a couple times too from the G League, but this was kind of a new thing for him to tap me on the shoulder and ask me for that. So sat with him, and then nothing came of it. So Jim and I went back home, and he actually came out to Prince Edward Island, where I was staying at a friend's cottage on the beach, and we just kind of hung out for a week. And the second last day we were there, got a call from Brad offering me the job in the G League. So we celebrated. Jim and I celebrated. He was going to be my assistant. And then the following day, he got a call from Portland to offer him a video spot. So he never ended up working with me, but it was a great week for us, kind of seeing that internship and that volunteer situation go full circle. And I still think of that day and smile because just sharing it with him, and we had kind of come up together that year. And Jim went on to be an assistant with the Trailblazers and the Pistons, and now he's the Trailblazers G League head coach. So we've done pretty good for ourselves, all things considered.
And it's connections with people who you're seeing down the road. Danny's here.
Yep.
You know, like Joe Missoula ends up on that Maine Red Claws staff. How did he come into your life and join the organization?
So I did 3 years as a head coach in Maine. Before the third year, I got a call from the same guy, Ron Norred, who's a friend of mine. Ron was now with the Nets, and Ron had offered Joe a job. Unbeknownst to Ron, the Nets had other ideas. So Joe quit his. He was a D2 assistant at the time. He quit his job and was getting ready to go work for Ron in Long Island. And then the Nets said, "No, we have other plans. You can't hire this dude." So Ron called me. I didn't know Joe. I kind of knew the name just from watching NCAA. So I called Joe, and we kind of hit it off. And I offered him a job on my staff, and kind of the rest is history. He did a great job. He actually left after that year and became a head coach at the same D2. He was an assistant, Fairmont in West Virginia. And we kept in touch, kept comparing notes and what we were looking at for film-wise. We had that kind of common desire to learn more and watch European basketball and FIBA basketball and different levels of basketball to try and learn. So we often compared notes. And I think after 2 years with the Celtics, Coach Stevens and I were talking about kind of revamping our player development program. And I thought Joe would be the best possible person we could hire to help with that. So Brad put me in charge of the program, and I suggested that he look at Joe. He knew Joe as well, and he agreed that he'd be great. So they met and talked, and he hired Joe. So we got to work together for 2 more years in Boston, and obviously he's moved on to bigger and better things, and to be honest, so have I. So it's been a great ride for us too as well.
What was your experience in the G League? Because you talk to players and you hear that kind of tests if you really love basketball at that level, because you're doing everything. It's not as glamorous as the NBA.
It's not as glamorous, but to be honest, these guys now have it a lot easier than they did back when I started. And that was only 7 or 8 years ago. The introduction of the 2 ways, so the NBA is a little bit more invested in the players and the conditions that they're working with. Having our own facility, our own weight room and stuff like that in Salt Lake was incredible. And I think it's a little bit of a aberration being here because it's so close to the NBA team and the relationship is so tight. But that's a credit to Danny and Jay-Z and Ryan and Will to kind of welcome the G League guys as part of the greater organization and makes you feel part of it. And those jobs now are coveted. To get a head coaching job in the G League now is a battle. When we hired Coach Wojo this year, it was like a dogfight for really good coaches to get that job. And when I was hired, not that I wasn't a good coach, but I had a lot less experience than the guys we were looking at this past summer for that position.
How did it come about for you? Because you were in Australia at that point, trying to figure out how do I get back into the NBA, and you get a call for a G League position.
Yeah. So when Coach Stevens moved up and stepped aside as his coaching role and hired Ime Udoka, I didn't know Ime at all. But I still didn't know if they were going to bring me back or not. I had another year in my contract. So I was sitting back in Canada. My wife and I have a house there that we built during COVID. And I was kind of just waiting to see, if I was going to get a call from Ime or what was going on. And I read on Twitter that they hired Will Hardy. And I didn't know Will at all. I've never met him. But I knew that was my spot. We were kind of the same role, offensive type guy. That was my role in Boston. Not a former player, so I wasn't going to try and fill that seat. So I remember saying to my wife, I think we're out. That's it. And I've told Will this. I wasn't a big fan of him at the time. And nothing against him. Obviously, he didn't know me either. But
it's competitive.
Yeah. And human nature. This guy took my spot. What's going on here? So we ended up taking the job in Perth. We could have, in retrospect, just sat home and collected a year's salary, which probably would have been the smarter thing to do. But I wanted to keep coaching, so we went to Perth, did a year there, learned a lot. I was glad we did it. It was a good experience. It wasn't the easiest time, but that's a whole other podcast. We decided to come back home for some family reasons. So we came home with no job. We were basically looking for a place to set up shop for the year, to try and network and get back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing some work with the U23 team in Toronto, Canadian U23 team. Got a call from an unknown number on my phone one morning, and it was Will. Would you ever be interested in going back to the G League? And I don't know if he thought I wouldn't be because I had been in the NBA before, but it was the quickest yes I ever uttered it from my mouth, I think. So was very interested. Just wanted a spot to get back in. It was a great opportunity to start with a organization with a new owner, new front office, new coach. And even though I didn't know him that well, I was like, I've heard good things from the guys in Boston that had stayed around. That my friends that had been in the Celtics. So I met Will in Vegas. I think we met for like 10 minutes and had the job. So really grateful and humbled that he offered me the position. I know guys like Danny and Luca Desta and Evan Brads, probably put in a good word for me, but he still had to take a chance on me, and worked out pretty good overall for me.
And you're working with some of the big pieces of the Jazz, whether they're two-ways or like Ochai. He was down in the G League a lot at the beginning of the year. You're working with guys who have NBA potential. They may not be Kevin Durant, but there are a lot of role players down in the G League.
No, for sure. The G League's a great place to find your, maybe 6th through 10th man. The biggest thing in the G League is making sure the guys understand, like, hey, the NBA is not looking for the next James Harden down here. They're looking for the next, Robert Covington or Ochai Agbaji. So we got a lot of credit last year for Ochai's development, but to be honest, it's just the vessel of the G League is what deserves the credit. Like, Ochai got to play. That was it. Like, he's a good kid. He works hard. He got a chance to play, and thus his improvement came because of that. It wasn't really anything that I did. So, but that shows the importance of the G League for the amount that the NBA guys get paid. The G League is a small investment to try and get a high value for the guys that you have on contract in the big time. So, it was a great experience. Like I said, Salt Lake was a pretty good setup for the G League. Being in a Delta hub helped as well. There wasn't too many connecting flights, and I hate flying, so that was good for me. And the Jazz were incredible. It's an incredible place to work. You feel part of it no matter what role you have. And can't say enough good things about how I was treated last year. I remember I came in the first week hanging around practice, and Ryan, our owner, came up to me by name and said, "Hey, welcome, Scott. It's great to have you here." Talked about the G League a little bit. And I remember going home to tell my wife, Suzanne, like, this is crazy. The owner came up to me, knew my name. And I just got here. I'm a G League coach. So that kind of set the tone for how it was the rest of the way. So really, really grateful to work here, no question.
So when does the call come for you to join the Jazz as an assistant coach?
So we were struggling in the G League, but it doesn't really matter. If you win or lose, it's more about development. So Will called me into his office before a Jazz game, I think in January, early January, and which was kind of weird. Maybe he wanted to talk about offense, I wasn't sure. And then he said, wait, I'm calling in Jay-Z, Justin, as well. So, all right, this is different. They came in, he's like, we want you to know that whatever happens, we're going to bring you up to the Jazz next year. And basically he was doing me a solid by telling me this so I could, stop panicking about how I'm going to support my family.
Right.
And
where am I going next?
Are we moving for a third time,
Yeah.
And that was the reason he told me earlier. So I had already been humbled already once with the Celtics when I left, so I wasn't getting too crazy, but I was very happy. I think I might have shed a tear or two because it was a long 2 years to get back, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get back. I didn't know what role. He didn't know what role, but he just said, you're going to be here, settle in. So that was big for me. Kind of made me relax a little bit with our own team, the Stars. We actually ended up going on a pretty good run, made the playoffs, and I had no regrets with how we handled that season, but it was also nice that knowing in the back of my mind that no matter what happens here, you're going to be okay for the next little stretch. So season was over, and Coach brought me into his office again for our year-end meetings, and that's where I learned I was going to be in the front bench and one of the top assistants, and might have shed a tear that day too, just knowing that this was a blessing to be here, and knowing that I found kind of a great fit for myself, which is what any coach, that's all they ever want, is to be a place where you fit in, where you feel valued, where you can contribute and be part of a greater good. So that's what we are trying to do here, and I think my expectations have been exceeded.
How are you contributing? What are the dividing of responsibilities among the assistants and where you fit in?
Well, Will did a great job, I thought, of kind of defining our roles. That's another thing that assistant coach needs is, what's my role? What's expected of me? What's my responsibilities? Who am I going through? Who am I working with? Things like that. So we did a coaches retreat before training camp started, and the first 10 minutes was that, and I thought that was a genius thing to do. Everyone understands what their expectations are, what their role is. My role is basically the offensive kind of leader, I guess, as on the assistant side. So guys will contribute. It'll kind of go through me. Everyone has a voice, but I guess I have the final piece of input to coach. So that's part of my role. I work with John Collins. Most of us have one or two players assigned to us to work with. The guys on the front bench who have a little bit more scouting responsibility have less players to work with. The guys who have less scouts have a couple more players. It all kind of evens out, and we take it from there. So Will and I get along really well. Ironically, after how we started back in that summer, but we have, I think, a common bond that we are sarcastic to a fault and like to crush each other and everyone that walks in our path. But we can also snap back at at a moment's notice and be locked into whatever the job or task or goal at hand is. And that's what I meant by being a great fit. Like that's the kind of style I like to be. I like to be able to joke around, but also lock back in and be serious when it's called for. What's the point of doing this stuff if you can't smile and have a laugh every now and then? We get treated pretty good. We're spoiled. It's the best job in the world as in terms of a basketball or a sports coach. Obviously, there's hundreds of people fighting for these jobs, and you got to do your work and do a good job. But why not enjoy it while we're here?
He wanted to know. Well, he didn't want to know. I guess he knows, but he did tell me to ask you, what's the deal with all the drinks that you have in coaches' meetings? All the proteins, the health drinks that you're trying to put in your body.
Man, we got like 5 nutritionists here. So their job is to have these guys like operating at the highest level, the players. So I figure if there's something set out in the kitchen, that's what I should be putting in my body. So if there's blue, yellow, red shots out there, I'm drinking them. I don't know what's in them. They taste awful. But I have enough bad habits when I leave here that I better put some good stuff in there to make sure it all cancels out.
You don't even know what it is.
I think there's some cayenne or something in there.
Okay.
Turmeric.
What has led to the Jazz's turnaround? Offensively, I mean, as one of the offensive minds on this team, seeing the way that they played in November to where it is now in January, it doesn't look the same. So what led to that offensive turnaround?
There's probably a long list of things, but I would point to 2 main things. One, and I'll give Will credit for both. We were trying to do some things at the start of the season in training camp that I think in hindsight weren't really in his vision, weren't really how he wanted to be. He was, I don't know why he was compensating for what he thought we needed to do, or maybe he was trying to compensate for some of the players' tendencies, but he's kind of switched it back to how he wants to play, which is wide open spacing, free flowing, guys making reads as opposed to being scripted all the time. And I think the players have really adjusted well to that and thrived in that system. And also he's found a great mix of rotation, who's starting, who's coming off the bench, who's playing together, just that whole mix of combinations, pairs, 3 guys on together at the same time, things like that, there's numbers for all those things, but you have to have a good feel for it. And I think that's what he's best at, is having a good feel for what's going to make each guy be their best and perform to their best level. So, taking JC off the bench, making him the 6th man again, for example, playing John as a 5, rotating him with Walker, all these things add up to just a more cohesive unit and a better fit on the court for the 48 minutes.
What is it about John at the 5 that is working for him so well?
Well, John can play other spots too, but with the other players that we have, for example, Lowry's a great 4. playing Lowry at the 4 allows us to play Tech at the 3 more. The start of the season, we were trying to squeeze Lowry at the 3, John at the 4. Tech was getting pushed out. Tech's been our most consistent player since day one, so getting him in that lineup's been important. John at the 5, he has advantages over his matchup that he doesn't have at the 4. He's more athletic, he's faster, he can shoot. So teams that have a big rim protector that want to hang around the paint, John can space the floor. Teams that have a slow, kind of plodding big, we can put John in pick and roll. He can get behind him as a roller and get to the rim, get lobs. So it's unlocking some of his advantages as well. And then walk off the bench has been great. His play has really picked up, I feel like, since he got back from his injury. And he's been one of the best rim protectors in the league since then. He's also anchoring that second unit. So guys like JC, who maybe aren't, I'm not saying he's a bad defender. He's not a bad defender, but he's not known for his defense. So that allows him to go and do his thing offensively and float around a little bit defensively. Just having that kind of anchor back at the rim, knowing that we can play some zone, things like that. So Will's just found a great fit for how he wants to play. And as long as we stay healthy, I think hopefully it'll keep rolling.
What was the decision to going slick back hair?
Mine?
Yes. Because it has to be a decision, and Will asked me to ask you, when did you make this decision? Why did you do this?
Well, haters would say to cover a bald spot.
I'm not a hater.
I started doing it before when I had a full head of hair. I just have a nice little flow there.
Pre-bald.
Yeah. But my idol growing up as a coach was Rick Pitino and Pat Riley. Two slightly different hairstyles, but similar in spirit. So when I started coaching, I think I was 24, my first head coaching job it was a women's college team. I started slicking it back, and the rest is history.
In a suit?
Always suits. I was one of the few, after the bubble, when the NBA Coaches Association, we all voted on do we go back to suits or do we stay with the more casual. I was one of the 20% or 18% that voted for suits. Not because I'm any kind of, John Gotti or something like that, but I'd invested in all these suits, and now they're just going to say we're not going to wear them anymore. So I feel like it was a waste of money. But now that we've had a couple of years where we're wearing the more casual stuff, I wouldn't go back. Plus, now the investment in suits goes to shoes. So I'd much rather put my money into shoes than suits.
Well, this is a good segue to what you're doing with your son with shoes, because this is something that the Jazz organization has been about with Joe and Renee Ingalls previously, Autism Awareness. Your son, how are you using shoes to bring awareness to this situation?
So I think it's worth mentioning, when we left Australia, we left mainly because of Max, our son. He couldn't get the treatment that we thought he needed being autistic in Australia. That's where we learned that he had autism. So we're like, we got to get back to the States and see how we can give him the best possible treatment. We had a mutual friend, the Ingalls and us, Aaron Baines. Aaron played for me in Boston. We became friends. He was back in Australia when we were there. When we met for lunch one day, he said, you got to talk to Joe. I'll connect you guys. So Aaron's wife connected Suzanne, my wife, with Renee. And they became, I guess, friends or whatever. They talked a lot about autism. And the first thing that Renee said is, you got to get back to the U.S. where the treatment's better. When we got back to North America without a job, we were discussing places to live where Max could get the best treatment. We had no idea what we were doing. So Salt Lake was actually one of the places that we talked about moving to because we could just follow what the Ingalls did with their son. That was before Will ever called me. So when he called me, it was almost like it was a sign from someone that we're getting looked after here. So that was kind of the backstory. We learned about all the stuff Joe and Renee did for the autistic community. We can't fill that void, unfortunately, but we wanted to do something to try and start contributing, fundraising, raising awareness, whatever the case is, whatever we can do to help. And the first idea we had was to try and get some head coaches involved to raise awareness for autism acceptance. Autism Acceptance Month is April. Some teams do a night, some teams don't. So the idea was to get white Air Force One shoes decorated with the Autism Awareness theme, and try to get as many head coaches as possible to wear them for a game, and then get their team's media involved and raise the the awareness for autism acceptance that way. So it was just like an idea to start things. Hopefully it'll grow to something much bigger. I think it will. It's starting to pick up some steam right now, but basically we have 8 to 12 coaches.
Who's some of the coaches?
Well, I just started with people that I kind of had a relationship with. So obviously Will and Joe are involved. Joe happens to be Max's godfather, so that was an obvious connection. We have Tom Thibodeau, Frank Vogel, Mike Brown, 3 or 4 other guys. Iffy, probably going to do it. I have a call with the head of the Coaches Association tomorrow, so he caught wind of it. He's going to try and help out, but we're happy that we have a start anyway. We had, Chuck from our front office has a connection with Nike. He was able to get some shoes donated for us. We have a local artist here that also has an autistic daughter, ironically, that does, he's one of the best shoe customizers in the world. He's going to come on board and customize the shoes. So it's picking up steam. I hope we can use it to start raising some money somehow. That all remains to be seen, but at least we're going to get the word out there in 8 to 10 cities and have those teams kind of help us promote the cause. And if this can be a start for something real big, that would be great. We may never fill the shoes of Joe and Renee, but hopefully we can at least put a dent in it.
Well, I know, at least for Jacob, for Joe and Renee, this was a great spot where they made an impact, where they have the sensory room in the arena. They've tried to bring in Culture City as a place that can make Vivint Arena or the Delta Center home.
Yeah, no question. It's a like any other community. The autism community is it's a small world type of deal. Just yesterday, I got a text from Micah Potter, who's one of our two-way players, played for me in Salt Lake last year. He was sitting on the plane beside a guy who does autism work for trying to make airports more autism friendly. Right. And he had heard about my story as well and wanted Micah to connect us. So that was just something that happened yesterday. So that's a guy that I'm going to reach out to today. And I don't know where this is all going to lead, but I guess our goal is just to try and do some small part in helping kids like Max be accepted down the road and make their lives a little bit easier as they get older, because he's got his challenges ahead of him, just like all the other kids that have autism and adults that have it. So I'm not sure what the future is going to look like for him, but we're going to do whatever we can to try and do our part to help out.
It's a worthy cause.
No question. I don't know the exact number. I probably should off the top of my head, but it's something like 1 in 40 kids right now is being diagnosed with autism. So every kid looks different. Every kid's situation is different, which makes it harder too. But the more acceptance and awareness and talk that we can have will be a help.
We will keep an eye out for that. He's assistant coach Scott Morrison on Roundball Roundup on UtahJazz.com. Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story and spending time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.